The morning I came home to a note on the kitchen counter, I had been married to my wife for 19 years. I remember the light. It was that particular kind of November afternoon light in western Pennsylvania. Pale and flat, coming through the window above the sink and landing on a folded piece of paper propped against the fruit bowl. My wife always used that fruit bowl. She kept oranges in it even though neither of us ate them. She just liked the color, she said. She liked having something warm in the kitchen. I set my keys down. I poured myself a glass of water, and then I picked up the note. I filed the papers this morning. The business account has been transferred. My attorney will be in touch. Please don't call me. That was it. No signature. She didn't sign it. After 19 years, she wrote me 4 sentences and didn't even put her name at the bottom, as though I might not know whose handwriting it was. I stood at that counter for a long time. Long enough for the water in my glass to reach room temperature. Long enough for the light to shift. I kept reading those 4 sentences, not because I didn't understand them, but because some part of my mind refused to accept that this was the complete message. That there wasn't a second page. That nothing in 19 years had earned me even one more line. My name is Walter. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a regional packaging supply company from a single warehouse in Allegheny County into something with 4 distribution facilities and a client list that included 3 of the largest grocery chains in the Mid-Atlantic. I did not build it alone, but I built most of it before I ever met my wife, and I want you to understand that clearly before I tell you the rest. I met her at a charity dinner in 2005. She was the event coordinator. She was poised and precise, and she laughed at the right moments, and she had a way of making you feel like you were the most organized person in the room just by standing near her. We dated for 2 years. We married in the fall of 2007 at a small ceremony in the Laurel Highlands. 30 people, her sister, my 2 sons from my first marriage, a handful of colleagues. Simple. That was what she wanted, and I thought simple was honest. What I did not know, standing at that altar, was that my wife had a very long memory and a very patient disposition. I would not understand those qualities fully until 19 years later, on a Tuesday afternoon in November with a folded note and a fruit bowl full of oranges that nobody was ever going to eat. Let me tell you what she had done. 3 months before that note, she had approached the board of my holding company, a 3-person board that included herself, my longtime attorney Gerald, and my younger son from my first marriage, Dennis. I had added her to that board in 2015. A gesture of trust, a gesture of partnership. She had seemed genuinely moved at the time, using a provision in our operating agreement that I had frankly not reviewed carefully enough. She had proposed and passed a resolution to restructure the holding entity. The resolution authorized the transfer of the operating accounts of 2 of our 4 facilities, the Harrisburg facility and the one outside of Frederick, Maryland, into a newly created LLC. The new LLC had 1 member, her. Gerald had voted against it. Dennis, who was 29 and had only been on the board for 14 months and trusted her completely, had voted in favor. The measure passed 2-1. My wife was the chairman. She had called the meeting on a Thursday when I was in Cleveland for a supplier conference. Gerald called me from the parking lot afterward, and I could hear in his voice that he had aged 10 years in the preceding 2 hours. "She's been planning this," he said. "Walter, this did not happen in 3 months." He was right. What Gerald had found in the weeks that followed as we began pulling documents was a paper trail that went back almost 4 years. Quiet conversations with a corporate attorney in Pittsburgh. A series of LLCs formed in Delaware, each one nested inside the previous one like Russian dolls. A personal financial advisor she had consulted, not the one we shared. A separate one, a woman in Shadyside who had apparently been helping my wife construct an exit strategy since approximately 2020. She had not been hasty. She had not been emotional. She had been methodical in a way that suggested she had looked at our marriage the way a contractor looks at a demolition job. She had studied the load-bearing walls, identified which ones she could remove without the structure collapsing before she was clear of the building, and she had worked her way through them one by one, slowly, quietly, while I was in Cleveland and Harrisburg and Frederick and all the other places I went, because I had spent 30 years going places, and I had assumed that what I came home to would always be there. I want to be honest with you about something. When I finished reading Gerald's full report, I sat in his conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Pittsburgh, and I looked out at the river, and I felt something I was not expecting to feel. I was not angry, not yet. What I felt was tired. A specific kind of tired that I think only comes when you realize that someone has been working very hard, for a very long time, against you, and they did it while sitting across from you at dinner, while asking you about your day, while keeping oranges in a fruit bowl that you now understand was never about warmth at all. Gerald poured me a glass of water and said nothing. He is a good attorney because he knows when to let silence do its work. I let the silence do its work for about 40 seconds. Then I said, "Tell me what we have." What we had was actually more than she had anticipated. The first thing I did was something that Gerald had actually recommended the moment she joined the board in 2015. I had not done it then because I thought it would seem distrustful. I did it now. I revoked the power of attorney she held over my personal accounts. The document she had used, Gerald discovered, to authorize a secondary signatory change on one of the facility accounts 8 months earlier. The revocation was filed the same afternoon I left Gerald's office, before she knew we had the report. The second thing I did was call my accountant, a man named Phil who had been doing my books since 1998 and who had the personality of a very calm, very thorough gray boulder. I asked Phil to perform a full forensic accounting of both affected facilities, going back 4 years. Phil asked me no questions other than clarifying questions about scope. He said he would have preliminary findings in 3 weeks. The third thing I did was nothing. I went home, I cooked dinner, I watched the news. When my wife came home that evening, she asked how my day was, and I told her it was fine. A little long, Gerald sends his regards. She nodded and went upstairs to change, and I sat at the kitchen table. And I thought about something my father told me when I was maybe 22 years old. He said, "Walter, the most dangerous thing you can do in a negotiation is show your hand before you know theirs." My father was not a complicated man, but he had a gift for sentences that turned out to be exactly right years after he said them. Over the following 6 weeks, I learned her hand completely. Phil's forensic audit found $340,000 in management fees paid from the Harrisburg facility to a consulting firm that, after 2 layers of shell company, was controlled by my wife's personal LLC. The fees were documented with invoices. The invoices described consulting services that, upon examination, did not correspond to any observable activity at the facility. The facility manager, a good man named Ron who had worked for me for 11 years, told Phil's team that he had never interacted with this consulting firm, had never received any deliverable from them, had signed the payment authorizations, he said, because they arrived with a cover memo on company letterhead, and he had assumed they were approved at the holding level. Ron looked devastated when he said this. I told him he had nothing to apologize for. I meant it. There was more. The Delaware LLC structure, when Gerald's team fully unwound it, revealed that 2 pieces of equipment from the Frederick facility, a $180,000 automated banding system we had purchased in 2021, and a $90,000 stretch wrapper, had been quietly transferred on paper to an entity that would ultimately have allowed my wife to lease them back to my own company. She had not yet completed this maneuver. She had been in the process of it when she apparently decided that the timeline needed to accelerate and sent me the note. Gerald's theory was that she had intended to be fully extracted before I understood what had happened. That the note was not part of the original plan. That something had changed, or she had gotten impatient, or she had simply decided that she had enough and moved. He thought she had made a mistake by moving too early. I did not know if it was a mistake, but I knew what I had. I want to stop here for a moment and tell you something about what this period was like to live through. Because I think it is easy to hear a story like this and imagine the person at the center of it operating like a machine, making cold decisions, feeling nothing. That is not what it was like. What it was like was this. I woke up at 3 in the morning regularly for about 6 weeks. Not from nightmares, just awake. staring at the ceiling of the bedroom we had shared for 15 years and running the same calculation over and over. Not the financial calculation, but the other one, the one where you tried to identify the last moment everything was real. The last dinner that was just dinner. The last Sunday morning that was not, in retrospect, a performance. I thought about our trip to Portugal in 2019. I thought about the evening she sat with me in the hospital waiting room when Dennis had his appendix out. I thought about small things. The way she organized the spice drawer, the specific brand of coffee she bought, the fact that she had told me once, and only once, that she had never expected to be happy in a second marriage, and that I had surprised her. I turned that sentence over in my mind for a long time in those 3 a.m. hours. I still do not know what to do with it. But I want you to understand that the decisions I made in the weeks that followed were not made from a place of coldness. They were made from a place of clarity that comes, I think, only after you have sat with grief long enough that it stops surprising you. Grief becomes familiar. And when grief is familiar, you can set it down for a few hours and think. Gerald filed our response on a Thursday morning in February. We filed in the Court of Common Pleas of Allegheny County. The filing documented the unauthorized management fees, the equipment transfers, the Delaware LLC structure, and the operating agreement boat, including a memorandum from Gerald arguing that the boat had been procedurally improper because she had failed to disclose a material conflict of interest as required under our operating agreement's fiduciary provisions. Her attorney, a sharp woman from a firm in Shadyside, different from the financial advisor, this one specialized in business litigation, filed the response 2 weeks later. She was good. She argued that the management fees were legitimate consulting expenses. She argued that the equipment transfers were intra-company movements authorized under the restructuring. She argued that the operating agreement vote was valid. The judge assigned to our case was a woman named the Honorable Patricia Calhoun, who had been on the bench in Allegheny County for 18 years and who had, according to Gerald, zero patience for documentation she considered incomplete. Judge Calhoun had questions. She had questions specifically about the consulting firm. She wanted to see the actual deliverables, not the invoices, the deliverables, the work product. What had been produced in exchange for $340,000 over 38 months? Her attorney asked for additional time to compile the documentation. Judge Calhoun gave her 3 weeks. I was in that courtroom when her attorney returned 3 weeks later with a binder. I watched Judge Calhoun read through that binder for approximately 12 minutes, while the courtroom was very quiet. Then she set the binder down and looked over her glasses at the attorney for my wife and said, in a conversational tone that was somehow more serious than if she had shouted, "Counsel, I have significant questions about whether the services described in these documents were ever actually rendered. I would like your client to be prepared to testify personally to the specific nature of her involvement with each deliverable. We will schedule that testimony for 6 weeks from today." My wife's attorney said that her client would be available. My wife, seated 2 rows behind her attorney, did not look at me. She had not looked at me once during any of the proceedings. I had looked at her, occasionally, not out of hostility, but out of the same compulsion that makes you look at something you cannot explain, the way you look at a place where something used to be. I will spare you the procedural details of the following 3 months. What matters is this. In the face of personal testimony and Phil's forensic documentation, the $340,000 in management fees was ruled improperly documented and ordered repaid to the holding company. The equipment transfers were reversed. The restructuring vote was invalidated on fiduciary grounds. The 2 facilities, Harrisburg and Frederick, came back. The settlement was reached on a Wednesday afternoon in May. I was not in the room. Gerald was. He called me afterward and said it was done, and I sat in my truck in the parking lot of Eaton Park outside of Monroeville. And I looked at the mountains in the distance, and I felt something I had not felt in 6 months. Not happiness, exactly. Not triumph. Something quieter than that. Relief, maybe. The specific relief of a man who has been carrying something very heavy and has finally set it down. Not because the weight is gone, but because the carrying is finished. I drove home the long way that day, through the Laurel Highlands, past the town where we had been married, though I did not stop there, through through some of the most genuinely beautiful country in the eastern United States, which has the courtesy to remain beautiful regardless of what is happening in your personal life. The ridgelines and the hemlocks and the particular way the light falls on those hills in late afternoon in May, which is unlike the light anywhere else I have ever been. I want to tell you something about Dennis. My son was 29 when he cast that vote. He has called me every 2 weeks or so since this began. He does not always know what to say. Neither do I, but he calls, and I answer. And we talk about the business and his apartment in Lawrenceville, and occasionally, briefly, about what happened. He told me once that he felt he had failed me. I told him he had trusted someone he was supposed to be able to trust, and that was not failure. That was just what trust looks like before it is broken. I meant that too. There are things I know now that I did not know in November. I know that a marriage can look from the inside exactly like a marriage while one person is already somewhere else entirely. I know that patience, which I have always thought of as a virtue, can also be a kind of weapon in the hands of someone who has decided to use it that way. I know that a fruit bowl full of oranges is just a fruit bowl full of oranges until it isn't, but here is what I also know. I know that 31 years of building something is 31 years. She transferred 2 accounts. She did not transfer 3 decades of relationships, of reputation, of the particular trust that develops between a man and his employees and clients when he shows up, reliably, through recessions and supply chain disruptions, and every other thing that tries to take a business apart. Ron is still my facility manager in Harrisburg, Phil is still my accountant, Gerald is still my attorney. The grocery chains still order from us. What she took was what she took. What she did not take was everything else. I still have the note. I do not know why I kept it. It is in the top drawer of my desk at the office, the desk I have had since the early years, a big oak thing I bought secondhand in 1994 that my assistant has been trying to get me to replace for a decade. I do not take the note out and read it. I just know it is there. Sometimes I think about what I would have written back if I had known then what I know now. I think about what 2 words might have said everything necessary and nothing extra. But I did not write 2 words. I picked up the phone and called Gerald. And then I went to work. That has always been, in the end, what I know how to do. Go to work. Build the thing. Pay attention to what is actually in front of you, not what you assumed would always be there. Revoke what needs to be revoked. Document everything. And when a judge asks a question that your opponent cannot answer, let the silence in that courtroom do exactly what silence does when there is nothing left to say. I am 63 years old. I still get to the office before anyone else. The building smells like coffee and cardboard and the particular industrial smell of a packaging facility that has been running for a long time. I like that smell. I liked it the first time I walked into a warehouse 31 years ago, and I like it now. The oranges are gone. I did not replace them with anything. The fruit bowl is still there. Some habits survive even the reasons for them. But it is empty now. And in the mornings when the light comes through the window above the sink, it lands on something that is simply what it is. That, I have decided, is enough.